Zoom event that we have pulled together with Achilles International. I'm Kirstin Cole. I'm going to be your host and moderator tonight, and we have pulled together a terrific panel of people to talk about the 30-year anniversary of the signing of the American with Disabilities Act. Governor David Paterson is with us, the former governor of the state of New York and the current chairman of the board of Achilles. Former Congressman Tony Coelho of the state of California is with us as well. He was one of the major sponsors of this bill when it started 30 years ago, or when it was actually enacted 30 years ago. Also with us, John Pluhowski, who is the Chief Communication Officer of TD Bank and a terrific sponsor of Achilles Virtual 5-Miler that we have just finished wrapping up today. Francesco Magisano, who's the director of Achilles Tri-Team, and Minda Dentler, who is a para-triathlete, a motivational speaker, and also a mom. Hello, everybody. And of course, hello to everybody who is joining us via Zoom today. How you guys doing today?
Good.
Great, thank you.
Good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great to have everybody here today. This is just such a momentous time as the 30-year anniversary, but also I think that it comes at an incredible time as we have seen so much movement towards change in our nation for being able to address people who have been treated as other than or lesser than. And there is no greater time to celebrate the 30-year anniversary, I think, than right now in this moment in our nation. I want to be able to share with you something that I read in the op-ed of the New York Times today, and forgive me if you've already read it, but I thought it encapsulated it so well, written by Judith Heumann and John Woodach, who were very involved and at the forefront of the disabilities movement during the 70s. And they talked about how, in this op-ed, how President Bush signed this into law in 1990. Like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the ADA was watershed legislation, culmination of a decades-long campaign of organized protest and activism. It, too, was a victory in the struggle for equality for a group of people who had been systematically denied basic rights and access to public spaces and services. On the 30th anniversary of the law, it's only natural to want to celebrate, and we should. And I think this has such great reverberations with the other movements that we are seeing in our nation right now with hashtag #MeToo, with hashtag Black Lives Matter. And I'd like to bring Congressman Tony Coelho in to talk about exactly that right now. Talk about how this has so many ramifications today with what's happening.
Thank you, Kirstin. It's nice to be on the program with you. I think people don't realize that 30 years ago, it was legal for somebody in a business or whatever to ask you if you had a disability and could actually legally say, because of your disability, you're not going to be hired. 30 years ago, if you were in a wheelchair and you went to a movie theater, they could kick you out by saying you were a hazard. That was legal. 30 years ago, if you went to a restaurant and you were sight impaired and you asked to see what was on the menu, they could kick you out because you were a nuisance. I can go on and on what was going on 30 years ago. And today, all of that is illegal. All of that, you can file charges against people. And so I don't think people really appreciate all the things that have happened. One of the things as a result of the disability movement, go to every street corner and you'll see a curb cut. And what is that curb cut there for? It's to provide access to people in a wheelchair so they can get on the street to shop or whatever. But who uses it? Mothers and fathers with babies in a wheelchair. Delivery men and women taking goods to the stores on that block. The elderly. And young kids on rollerblades, roller skates, and so forth. But it's now a way of life. And most of the accommodations that have been in place in the last 30 years are really conveniences for those of you without disabilities. And so getting that law into place has basically given 25% of the population access to the real world. And if you take a loved one or someone who is taking care of you, included in that, we're over 50% of the population. And we're the only group that is in every other group. We have women with a disability. We have people of color with a disability. We have farmers with a disability. We have whatever you decide as a community, we are there. So giving us our rights has become overwhelming for a large group of people. But it's no different than the rights that were given to people of color in the 60s, women in the 70s, and so forth. So we in the disability community are now included in everyday life. And later, I would like to discuss what needs to be done more, and particularly in the technology area. There's a lot to be done there.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Tony. There are so many things that have yet to be done, right? So we had this watershed legislation 30 years ago, and life has changed and moved a lot. We can talk about education in the time of COVID and accessibility. We can talk about voting rights coming into this election and being able to vote early or being able to vote by mail in order to make it more accessible. And since we're starting with if we go in chronological order, let's talk about the education piece. We just came through a period where we've been educating our children at home for pretty much a third of their school year. I'm a mom. I educated a first grader for 1/3 of his school year. Now we're going into the fall with a great deal of uncertainty, because even with school districts that say you can learn remotely or you can learn in the classroom, we know that depending on how COVID numbers shift, we may see changes within the education landscape in district by district. So if we talk about accessibility for all of the great advancements that have been made in education, meeting children where they need to be educated and providing them with support with their peers and integrating them into the classroom so they are not separated and other than and special and different. Now we see that they're not getting all of those accommodations that they should be getting in the educational space. So I want to bring in Governor David Paterson. Governor, you were running the state of New York, which is an incredibly diverse space. New York, upstate New York is very different from the city, is very different from Long Island or Westchester and some of the downstate counties. What can be done so that children who are receiving educational support under the fact that they have different learning plans, what should be done? What should we be seeing in order to accommodate those children in the time of COVID?
Well, in New York City, we have a bigger problem even than how the technology works. 40% of New York's families that have children in public school don't have broadband communication or any internet capacity for those youngsters to have watched their classes, as my stepson did when the pandemic hit. So really, the accessibility is almost financial, and what we're going to need, hopefully, before September, unable to assume whether or not the schools can physically open, is to have the resources to actually put the technology into the homes of the children who don't have it. And I am sure that created a massive gap. You know, one of the problems we always had in school is the kids get out in June. And I remember as a teenager in school, I came back in September and I couldn't seem to remember anything that I'd learned the year before. But the reality is that the technology is, I think, the major issue in ADA compliance right now. I think, rather shocked. I'd be curious to hear how Tony, the Congressman, feels. I thought that corporate America responded to accessibility to buildings and the construction of buildings and the inclusion of the ramps and other ADA compliance services went rather smoothly after the first couple of years into the Americans with Disability Act. But at the time of the act, 71% of Americans who were blind were unemployed. 90% of Americans who were deaf were unemployed, and about 40% of people with ambulatory disabilities didn't have jobs. Now, interestingly enough, in 1990, all of those groups tested higher in their educational proficiency. In other words, they went further in education and did better than the rest of the population. But now, because of the type of technology that's widely used, there is now a digital divide for the disabled. And we have situations such as up until just a few years ago, again, with the intervention of Congressman Coelho and the people that he works with at Audio Eye and different companies that provide these services, we had no accessible website for the Social Security website, which so many disabled Americans need, and we had no accessibility for the voter website for people who wanted to learn about elections, which is, one of the most highly favored aspects of being an American, is that you have the right to vote. So I'll be interested to hear how some of the panelists feel about that. And thank you, Kirstin, for being our host today. This is an historic day. It's a generation, the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And also it will be remembered as the day when the body of Congressman John Lewis was carried over the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the last time. And when I was on the board of the American Foundation for the Blind, he was our speaker one year. And he, I think, in addition to all that he did for civil rights for African Americans in this country, stood up for every group that was disenfranchised in our nation.
And Governor, thank you for reminding us about the great contributions of Congressman Lewis and the remembrance of him today on the day of his going home. It is so important that we continue to focus on all the things that we can do. A recent accessibility test found that out of 10 million websites, 98% of menus were inaccessible to use or read, and 71% of online forms failed. That's today. 7 out of 10 websites fail when it comes to using forms, whether it's being able to enlarge the screen, whether it's being cognizant of different levels of manual dexterity, whether it allows for an audio reading of it. And these are simple coding fixes that take corporations wanting to bring accessibility to people. And for that, I want to bring in TD Bank's, our TD Bank panelist, John Pluhowski. Thank you so much for being with us today, John, and thank you so much for your support of the Achilles Health. This has been an incredibly successful event that we had where people were able to virtually participate, and we had 3,000 virtual participants. And for anybody who's on this Zoom call right now who hasn't had the chance to go to the actual in-person event in Central Park, first of all, wow. And I know that anybody who's been to it is going to give me a wow. So go ahead and say wow. It is such a great event to attend. If you're looking for that incredible feeling of energy and to understand the human spirit and everything that it can do, that is what this event encompasses, because it is not an event for people with different abilities. It is an event for people of all abilities, and that's what you get to see there. And so thank you so much, John, on behalf of Achilles and for TD Bank's participation in all of this. Talk about how, as a corporate citizen, you work as making sure that accessibility is there for everybody, and how it's a constant process, and it's a learning curve, and it's a two-way conversation oftentimes in order to make things better.
So thank you, and we couldn't be more excited about the results from the virtual Hope and Possibility event. We've been involved with this event as a sponsor for the second year, but we've been involved with Achilles International for many, many years. It's really a reflection of our commitment to diversity and inclusion. As it relates to accessibility, that is something, as you said, it is a journey. We are very, very focused on it. And I think where we make the most strides is where we have dedicated teams who are specifically focused on not just making sure we're complying to all the requirements, whether they're state, whether they're local, or whether they're national, but also ensuring that we're staying ahead of what the new technologies are that allow us to advance some of the causes that we believe are important, that go above and beyond for our employees, for our customers, as well as for the communities. The third piece that's really important is partnership. And that is both in the private and the public sector. Those organizations that can help guide us in our efforts to make sure that we're doing everything we can to not just accommodate, but also make sure that we're setting everyone up for success, particularly our employees, as far as ensuring that they have the resources required to be successful in really being able to drive their careers within TD Bank.
And that brings up an excellent point, John. I want to bring in Minda Dentler, because not only is she an incredible para-triathlete and a mom, but she's also a working woman. And I think, Minda, you could probably speak pretty well to how corporations really are able to walk the walk of diversity and inclusion, and how it has so many continuing and ongoing benefits. You bring in people with different diversities, different abilities that they can bring to the table, and it is more reflective of the populations that they serve. So talk about how that works on a employee basis corporately.
Sure. Actually, so 20 years ago, my first internship was with the President's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities in Washington, D.C. And at that time, I was responsible for writing marketing collateral on the business case for companies to hire people with disabilities. And so fast forward today, we're having some of the same conversations. And while we have come a long way to diversify our workforce, I think there is a lot more to do. And especially with COVID-19 and the increased emphasis on working from home, I hope it will really compel and encourage more companies to hire people with disabilities. And when I think about it, I hope that we can not only aspire to have bigger goals than just getting people with disabilities into the door, but also to help work on strategies to be able to climb the corporate ladder, especially at the mid to senior management levels.
And so I'd also love to get your take on what the biggest challenges that we need to face and accept and tackle right now, especially with technology. This also going off of what Governor Paterson was saying, that accessibility via technology is even more important for people with disabilities. And I think COVID has only magnified that. Talk about how it is incumbent upon corporations to be accessible at all levels, not only with their internal spaces, but with their external communications and their websites that they make available to people.
Yeah, so for me, I'm a wheelchair user. So accessibility in terms of making the building, like having those curb cutouts and having working elevators, that's what's been important for me. Other accommodations that I've used because of the ADA or I have requested that have been important for me to be successful in the workplace have been having a lighter laptop. I know we're not traveling right now, but I was a management consultant, and having that lighter laptop was important for me to be able to carry my backpack easier, and having hand controls when I was traveling as well. I think were two accommodations that were really helpful to me.
Great.
And so let's bring in Congressman Tony Coelho again. So 30 years ago, we had this landmark legislation, and it brought everybody, gave them the ability to be at the table and started being able to move beyond some of the very ugly things that we had in our past, what are the things that are most important to continue the progression moving into the future?
I think there's a couple of things. First off, in regards to technology, as David pointed out, 98.1% of all websites are inaccessible. I'll repeat that, 98.1. That means that our community doesn't have the ability to do financial transactions, to be involved in shopping, to be involved with the bank, to be involved with whatever everybody else is. That doesn't make any sense. And so I am involved with others, and we're going to make a real push in regards to addressing that issue. I believe firmly that the ADA covers the internet. There was a lot of people in business don't think so. So a pizza company filed a lawsuit. It finally got up to the appellate court, the US appellate court. The US appellate court ruled in favor of the ADA, said, yes, the ADA requires you to be accessible. Well, that pizza company wasn't satisfied with that decision, appealed it to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court this year said, we will not accept that challenge. The appellate court is right. So basically, the Supreme Court has ruled that the ADA does cover internet websites and so forth. So now it's the enforcement of it. The enforcement of it really comes down to whoever is president, whoever appoints the justice, the attorney general, and whoever is in charge of the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department, who can go after companies, go after cities, go after states in order to enforce the law. I hope more people file lawsuits this year in order to make it happen. But what we should do in the Congress is get a law passed to clarify all that, so there isn't a dispute. The other thing I get concerned about is in regards to healthcare. During the COVID situation, 25 states have rationed healthcare, basically saying if you have a need for a device or whatever as a result of COVID, that if you have a disability, you're at the end of the line. And that whatever takes care of people that have the virus can be taken away from you and given to somebody who doesn't have a disability. That's not fair, doesn't make any sense. The ADA would cover that, but it takes enforcement to prevent it. We've been successful in getting at least 3 of the states to reverse their opinion, but that is something that the Justice Department should take action on. There's no way that that is legal, no way that should be done. So all of those things are corrections that need to be made. And with enforcement, we can make them. I just think that there's a lot of folks that feel that culturally that those of us with disabilities don't necessarily have the ability to do X, Y, or Z. I think David can relate to that. I can relate to that. I'm sure Minda can relate to that, is that we basically are considered in a negative way. That is a cultural issue that we have to overcome. But I would say, look at people of color, women, blah, blah, blah. I've been through that issue many times. So it's a matter for us in the disability movement to be aggressive, to push, to get this law that we have in effect to be helpful to us so that we can be treated just like anybody else. I've told the last 5 presidents that I only know one community in the United States that wants to pay taxes. And the reason? Because that means we have a job. That means we have the ability to participate and so forth. So we want to pay taxes, but give us a job so we can pay. And the unemployment rate is not good for our community, but it's getting things changed. We now have a law that says, or enforced, that says that federal contractors and subcontractors need to hire people with disabilities. So far, that was put in by Obama and so forth in executive order. So far, I know that in the first year of implementation, 464,000 people with disabilities got jobs. So it's things like this that with enforcement, we can make the ADA effective, but we've got to have the enforcement. We can't hear you. Kirstin? Kirstin, we can't hear you.
Tony, I can hear you.
I know, we can't hear Kirstin. There she is.
Can you guys,
We
or you
didn't
can hear me
anything-
here?
We didn't hear anything you said.
Now you can hear
Now
me.
we can hear you, yep.
For a minute, I thought
Okay.
that Tony was going to have to filibuster.
No, you know what? I really, all of this work from home, I'm sure I can get an amen across the board. I miss my IT people desperately. I miss the moment where I could yell out across a newsroom and say, can you help me with? So I was struggling here for a second. But what I was saying is in my research for this, I came across, going back to the 1970s, there was cross-movement solidarity between the Black Panther Party and the 504 activists at the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which was what the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it was modeled off of that. It prohibited those who received any federal aid from discriminating against otherwise, people who were otherwise abled and people with disabilities. And it was the first movement that we saw, but it was the Black Panther Party coming together and being a part of the longest sit-in ever of 25 days of a federal building in California. And let's talk about how cross-movement activism can also bolster this time up. And who wants to jump in on this particular piece of the puzzle?
David may want to, but I'll just tell you quickly that Congressman Lewis worked closely with the disability community in fighting for our rights. So that has been going on, but I'll let somebody else answer as well.
So I, of course, wound up on two lists, you know, one for being African-American and the other for being blind. And I did kind of notice that a long time ago, that coalition that perhaps the Black Panther Party had with the 504 advocates didn't exist in some places. And I remember when I was 18 or 19, there was a summer job that I didn't get because I was blind. And the person who could have hired me was the local chapter president of the NAACP. And he didn't hire me because he didn't think that I could put an apple and a sandwich in a lunchbox and close it for school daycare programs. So it's been an interesting movement to try to get groups that are similarly treated unequally to actually work together over the years. And, you know, for whatever reason, and unfortunately, this has been a problem with a lot of groups around the country, they can never really see what the other problems are in other groups. And that's why I was always very moved by those special people who would go into other communities, even as their communities were being unjustly treated, and advocate for them as well. And that's why when Saturday Night Live did a really, I didn't mind that they made fun of me as governor, but they created a kind of Mr. Magoo character, implying that blindness also meant lack of intelligence. And they went on with this for about a year and a half. And finally, a friend of mine said, you know, you fought them long enough. Why don't you just go on the show? And so I did go on the show, and I told them that they made fun of me so much for being blind that I forgot I was Black.
That's a good line. Kirstin, you're back off. Kirstin. There you go. There you
It
go.
made you a household name across the United States for those who weren't aware of who was the governor of the great state of New York. I don't know how you didn't start your presidential bid after that. I want to bring Francesco in at this point in time and talk about other things that are needed as the lead of our tri team with Achilles. Let's talk about the successes of Achilles. Let's talk about what Achilles brings to the table and what does for athletes of all abilities and what we still need to be done from that perspective. Francesco, jump in.
Yeah, awesome. So Achilles, like we are able to do what we do right now because of the ADA, and the ADA has laid the foundation both on a legislative standpoint, a social awareness standpoint, when we're out in the community, when we're working with partners such as TD Bank. It's given us the opportunity to go after equality and our various initiatives. And so now what's left to do in the future is just standardize those accomplishments, right? Like it's super special when we meet someone, whether it's an organization or a person who's willing to step outside their boundaries and work with us. We want to standardize that so it's not the exception, it's more the rule. And we see that with everything, even when we're talking, like going back to accessibility in technology, like there are websites and companies doing it amazingly, right? But that's the minority right now. So trying to bring it all up to a standard that is accessible for all is the current goal.
And John, I want to bring in John Pluhowski, who's our Chief Communications Officer for TD Bank. John, talk about why it's so important for corporate citizens like TD to be the participant, to support events like the Hope and Possibility. What kind of a message does it send externally? What type of message does it send internally? And how does it inspire others to act and support people who need that kind of corporate support in order to exist?
Yes, so great question. It's really important for us to make sure in all the communities we serve that we're really close to the organizations that are really driving advancement in disability inclusion. So we look at that really at a local level, we look at that at a regional level, we look at that on a national level as well. So to make sure that we're connected to those organizations. And then also what we do is look at the relationships and partnerships like with Achilles International, where we can get a little bit closer to scaling our ambitions to be able to help more people. Because Achilles is an international organization. So to the extent that we can help support it here in the US, there's a lot of halo and amplification of that movement and that cause, and also the momentum that creates that's on a global scale. And one of the reasons why we were so excited about the virtual event, the virtual Hope and Possibility, was that anybody at any time in any place in the world can participate. And we were amazed at the level of engagement. No one had really had any idea as to how many people were really going to be involved. But even within the bank, we had people from around the world who were participating, and our numbers were far greater, 4x greater than what we thought they would be as far as just our own people. That drives a lot of momentum. It gets people really excited. And it also drives advocacy, because people will say, I want to do more than just participate in the virtual event. What can I do to help in the community? What organizations can I get involved in so I also can contribute to really what I would call a movement?
And John, when you see these events exceeding their own expectations, whether it's internally, corporately at TD Bank or at Achilles, I think it sends such an incredible message to all of us who are involved that there is even more interest than we would anticipate, that there is even more interest in being a part of the solution than we anticipated. And it is one of those self-fulfilling cycles, and it gets people thinking, what else can we do? How else can we be involved? And I also saw one of these terrific studies that showed that when a corporation is staffed with people that reflect those that they serve in their community, that their profits are even higher. So you don't even have to go at this from an altruistic approach. You can also say, hey, this is good for our bottom line, and talk about what that means corporately today.
Well, that's absolutely true. And that was the basis of a study that was performed by Accenture, who looked at all those organizations that were truly committed to disability inclusion over the long haul. And they looked at those organizations, those businesses, against all their core competitors in all their key categories. And they universally outperformed their competitors, their peers, who were not as engaged in disability inclusion and equality as they were. So yes, it's important to do the right thing and for all the right reasons and for all the obvious reasons, but it also is great for the business as well. So, we think about that in terms of how do we continue the conversation? How can we actually lead the conversation? So you can take a great sponsorship with a great organization like Achilles, but use that as a way in which you can drive more engagement and more people having the conversation around the things that they can do. And then also really asking our customers, asking community leaders, asking our own employees, what else do you think we can be doing in your community to drive deeper engagement and greater progress for those with disabilities? So to us, as much as it's difficult to find any silver lining with the global pandemic, we've learned that virtual events like this help you scale your ambitions and drive deeper engagement. And we want to look further at that to see what else we can do to make sure for those with disabilities who may have challenges getting to a location, to a starting line for an event like Hope and Possibility, have other means in which they can do that. That's important.
Kirstin, can I make a comment?
Jump right in.
Okay. I just want to say something about CD Bank, John, and that is that CD Bank has been recognized as one of those companies that is very inclusive for our community. And they're part of a group called Disability In, which actually goes and checks these companies to see if they have, in effect, from our point of view, the good housekeeping seal of approval. And TD Bank does. And that tells you something about them. And I love and appreciate that, John, very much.
Thank you.
But what happens is that CD, and I'm sure John, recognize that those of us with disabilities, we're there every day when the job requires it. We stay until the end when the job requires it. We'll get there in the snow, in the rain, or whatever, because that job is so important to us. So that we basically are very productive because we haven't been included. We love the job. We want the job. And we are great performers as a result of it. And so I appreciate TD Bank's attitude towards our community. And several other companies now are just as involved. But thank you, John.
Thank you.
I think we'll all agree that our corporate sponsors are so much a part of the lifeblood of what it is that we do in the charitable space, and especially in the space where here we are advocating for barriers to be broken down, for making sure that everybody has a seat at the table, is included, is allowed to participate. And I think the Achilles message is so incredible, because even though it's just for those who aren't familiar with what we do, this is where we make sure that there is inclusion in every space when it comes to being able to perform, that athletes and athleticism happens at every level, no matter how you cross the finish line. And that's what has always been, so heart-stirring for me, watching somebody roll backwards across the finish line in a wheelchair. We've got some great videos. I would love to see that. Rolling backwards across the finish line, rolling on a skateboard, pushing just with your hands, with the athlete's hands, running side by side with somebody on a tether if you're blind. Governor David Paterson has crossed that finish line many a time. And so he knows the thrill of being able to run as an athlete and to experience that. And to see that sense of accomplishment and achievement on people's faces, to understand how this is very much a part of what is happening, in somebody's makeup, and how that can then have all of these great reverberations across their life. So it's like, if I can run whatever my ability is in a 5-mile road race, if I can run in the New York City Marathon, well, then I can get up in front of a group of people and I can run a meeting. I can run a sales pitch. I can do any of those things. And that's what Achilles gives to all of its participants. And I know that during my time as an Achilles board member, not only have we worked with people with disabilities, not only did we start reaching out extensively to soldiers who were disabled during wartime and combat activities, not only did we start reaching out to people that were dealing with weight issues or struggling with diabetes, and here you can see B-roll some of our races, that we will also be there in that space for people who are recovering from COVID. And with the lung issues that they're going to be facing, with the physical issues that they are going to be facing, Achilles would again be in that very same space to be at the place when you're ready to then come in on that. And you know what? I would like to bring in Francesco at this point in time, and Minda, as athletes and as athlete leaders, to talk about what it means to be a part of that, and what it gives to people when they do participate in the training sessions and in the events.
You want to go ahead, Minda?
Sure. I think so. My journey with Achilles started when I was 28. I was not an athlete, but I grew up in a very athletic family. I learned how to hand cycle, and I remember crossing that finish line thinking, wow, this is so amazing. And it also brought me into a community of disabled athletes that were achieving great things. And because I was able to hand cycle, I thought of bigger goals. And finally, I was able to excel and become the first female wheelchair athlete to complete the Ironman World Championship. And if I could say anything, I think it's about building confidence, and also that feeling that sports is actually an equalizer. It's not necessarily about what you look like, it's about what type of performance or being able to get it done. And those are the two things that I really appreciate about my experience being introduced to athletics with Achilles International.
Yeah, that's awesome, Minda. And I think you've expressed what a lot of our athletes also have gone through. I remember for me, I've been an athlete. I've done athletic stuff for most of my life, but growing up through school, right, like most gym classes aren't very accessible. So I'm totally blind. So I remember like going through elementary school all the way up to high school. Most of the time it's like, hey man, like, why don't you write an essay on soccer? Or, you know, it wasn't the most inclusive environment until I met this group of people in the park, these, you know, hooligans who run with people with disability. And it was the most amazing experience ever, right? And you build these small victories on top of each other, and they end up becoming this massive victory, to the point where, you know, you are able to go into a corporate setting or a private setting. You're talking in front of a group of people. You can take these big leaps of just faith that you would never have been able to do before in your personal life and professional life. And it's all thanks to this confidence that you build in one part of your life, your athletic life, but then also carries over to all the other parts. So it's just, you know, awesome. And all of our athletes, like we see, we have people in their teens going through high school. We have, you know, folks who are senior citizens, and they all go through the same situation, right? The ADA, going back to that, it's just, it enables us with the confidence that we build to then go into all these different situations with the tools that we need and the confidence to advocate for ourselves for what we need. And we're not asking for more than others, we're just asking for equality.
Minda and Francesco, thank you. I think you guys really nailed it. We don't want more than, we just want the same as, and how the experience of Achilles and the experience of athletic accomplishment, you know, reverberates just as much with every single person, no matter what your ability is. It all feels great, right? You know, whether you can run a mile, or whether you get to compete in a marathon, or whether you get to be, you know, an Ironman athlete, you know, it's amazing, and how it just continues to play out in our lives. I want to open up some of the questions that we're getting via Zoom and Facebook. And again, thank everybody who's being a part of this today. There are a couple that are similar. One relates to how can we be more effectively report employment discrimination, and another, what's being done to ensure the enforcement of a variety of compliance programs like IDEA, ADA, FAPE, HEOA in New York City, especially in the schools. And I am going to throw this squarely in the laps of our two politicians because I think the two of you can talk about how people can effectively use their elected officials to get through and make sure that the programs that are put in place for them are able to be utilized appropriately.
David, you want to go ahead?
There's a tactic in the courtroom about a question, and it's called asked and answered. I think that when Tony was talking earlier about the will of institutions, the will of government, the will of leadership to address these situations, it's very important. You can have laws on the books, but if no one's going to enforce them, or they're going to look the other way, and that's happened too many times in this country's history, then people not only are going to be beleaguered by the fact that they didn't get equal treatment, but also that when they tried to use the existing law and tried to inform the compliant agency, that they were rejected. So I think this is an area where elected officials play a very big role, because if you have an action and if you've notified an agency and there isn't a reaction to alert the elected officials who are responsible for their budgets that this is going on, it is a very meaningful way to address the problem for a second time.
I'm going to agree with David on that, but before I do, I want to make sure that everybody understands Achilles is an international group. The ADA has been exported to a lot of different countries. There's over 50 different countries that have an ADA for their people. It's not like totally like ours, but it's an ADA for their people. And that's a recognition throughout the world that we in the disability community have a right to participate, should participate, can participate if you permit us. But going back to the question, and that is that we have to understand all civil rights laws, ADA is a civil rights law, all civil rights laws have to be enforced. That means that the government has to enforce the law. If so, your vote counts. And so if you put in somebody or a group that does not support disability rights, you're going to get what you voted for. So making sure when you vote accordingly. And David's point is that as elected officials, when I was there, when people were concerned about a law or the treatment they were getting from an agency, I would go aggressively after that agency. And that's what it takes, is a willingness on the part of your elected officials. So if you're in New York or if you're in Nevada, whoever your local elected official is in the Congress or in the Senate, or if it's a local issue, you should go to your elected officials. And what I say all the time, when you go to your elected officials, you should be honest, direct, and straightforward about how it is impacting you. And if you get emotional about it, great. I mean, I've always believed that you should speak to power. I got rejected from the priesthood because the Catholic Church said, if you have canon law or epilepsy, you can't be a priest. When I became a congressman and became the leader, I met with Pope John Paul. And by the way, the Congressman Lewis was with me on that delegation. I met with the Pope and I said at the end of my comments, Your Holiness, I could not live with myself, but I have to say something personal. As a young man, I decided to become a Catholic priest. The church said, if you have epilepsy or possessed by the devil, you can't be accepted. That happened in 400 AD. The Pope listened, and when he left, he blessed my wife, turned to me, did not bless me, but he said, young man, I heard your comments. 2 years later, canon law was changed to permit people with
Wow.
epilepsy to become priests. Now, I'm not taking total credit for that. All I'm saying is that I spoke up. And I think it's basically what David said, the governor said, is that those of us with disabilities, if something is wrong, speak up. Go to your elected official and be tough with them. That's what's important. That's the way it's enforced. You're going to file a legal action or you're going to go to elected officials. It's a civil rights law. And so it has to be enforced. And that means you have to take the initiative.
So Tony, may I?
And I'm going to,
I was
I
just
just
gonna say,
want
Tony,
to
I want to make
piggyback
a
on that very
suggestion.
quickly. Go ahead, Governor.
Oh, I was just going to suggest to Tony that if the church thought that he had epilepsy because it came from the devil, I think the Congressman Lewis would have said it was a good devil.
As in starting some good trouble. I appreciate that, Governor. I also want to say that as a journalist on this panel, that you should be hitting up the journalists that serve you as well. The local writers on your paper, on your local websites. You should be hitting up people like me who are television journalists. We are here to serve the viewers and the readers, and you have more accessibility to them than ever before because of social media. So it would behoove you to know everybody's, to look up their Twitter handles, their Instagram space, their Facebook, and make comments and reach out. And just as the Congressman was saying, he spoke up to the Pope. Well, we're not the Pope, but we have a microphone and we can talk about your problem. And then we can go to those who should be held accountable and hold them accountable in a public space where oftentimes they don't want to be held accountable. So use all of the tools that are available to you. Somebody had actually written in on a question and had asked for all of our direct emails. You don't need our emails. All you need is my Twitter address, my Twitter handle, which you can look up. The same thing for the governor, the same thing for the congressman. You can reach out to not only us, but everybody beyond us. I want to talk about what we would all like to see, as we just have a few minutes remaining here, what we would like to see for the future. What is our fondest wish for the future? And I want to start with our two athletes, because this is Achilles. I want to start with our two athletes, Minda and Francesco. I'd like to see more of those great picture montages that we have of what happens in an Achilles event. And from the two of you, I want to hear what you would like to see over the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years.
Yeah, awesome. So I think we have this beautiful thing that is the ADA, which is a piece of civil rights legislation that has allowed us to do so much. And what I would like to see in the future is that more people get proactive about using that, just like what David and Tony was talking about. It doesn't do anything if no one uses it, right? And obviously there are people using it, but a lot more can. And, you know, it could be as big as talking to the Pope. It could also be as small as you not getting enough time on a test in high school and you just speaking up and asking for that accommodation, which is a reasonable accommodation. So it could be on any scale, but just using that tool that we were given 30 years ago and just using it to spread awareness and you know, whatnot throughout the community. I think that's what I would like to see in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, for me, I think the ADA is a great starting point, but there are still many places and spaces that need to allow for more access for people with disabilities like me. I think for me, my hope is for society to evolve to a place where accommodations aren't just headlines, because they are commonplace, and where we don't always have to advocate for ourselves, so we can actually live in a world that fully includes us.
That's awesome. If I could say one thing more, that's, I think, an awesome part about Achilles is that for most people, they're not against people with disabilities, right? They're not like actively trying to work against us. It's just awareness. And what Achilles does really, really well is raise awareness in the communities that they might have not known about people with disabilities, like running blades, wheelchair athlete, like any of it, right? They wouldn't have known. So just raising that initial awareness, just like what with TD Bank and their engagement within their own corporate setting, right? The moment people hear about it, it blows predictions out of the water. And I think that speaks to how much we relate to others. So just raising awareness, I think, will help as well with so many things that we're doing.
I want to turn to John Pluhowski now. What would you like to see over the next 5 years as a corporate citizen? How would you like to see the ADA continue to grow and provide for people?
Yeah, thank you, Kirstin. So I look back 30 years ago. Our son, 5 months after the signing of the ADA, was diagnosed with autism, and he has been a beneficiary of all the goodness that came out of the law as far as what we've been able to do to advocate for him through the public school system for many, many years. And everyone I talk to about the ADA will say there's no question that significant progress has been made, but more progress can be made in the future. And if I had to say as a parent, what I would love to see going forward, that we can make more progress in the next 10 to 15 years than we've made over the last 30. And I think in part, it's that partnership between the public sector, the private sector, government officials, but also technology is going to play a huge role in how we can advance some of what we're trying to accomplish, because everyone has the same end state, the same North Star. It's just a question how quickly we can get there, and I'm certainly advocating for more progress faster. Thank you.
Governor David Paterson, I just wanted to turn to you now and say, as somebody who's led the state of New York, what would you like to see here in New York and beyond?
I think what I would like to see is greater redress toward the symptom of the unequal treatment that disabled people get. And it comes from misperceptions by the general public of who people with disabilities are. There must be something about humanity that when we see something that's different from us, that for some reason our first reaction is negative. And so I would just hope spiritually that as our country moves forward and this organization moves forward, that we're able to get more people to understand that tomorrow, none of the disabilities that many of us have had make them exempt from having it themselves. And as Tony said earlier, we are a group that's in every other group, but every other group can become us in a heartbeat. And I would hate for some of them to tragically find out that what you see in other people can happen to you. So that would be my sort of wish for the future.
I'm going to give the last word to our Congressman, Tony Coelho, who was the majority sponsor of the American with Disabilities Act 30 years ago. Tony, what would you like to see?
Kirstin, my wish, my prayer, whatever you want, is that every corporation, every government, everybody would treat us as if we have the ability that they want. Because you know what? When you give us an opportunity to show what we can do it. And what we need to have, because if we get that job, just think of what we can do. We then can pay taxes, as I've said, but more importantly, we can participate in society like everybody else. We can spend money, we can do things. And what I want more than anything else is to change the culture that has existed against the disability community, and to change it so that people look at us and don't immediately think you can't do X. And getting that culture to change so that if you're an athlete, if you're a banker, whatever it might be, that people would say, oh, let's see what we can do to help you get a job or whatever. But changing that attitude, I call it stigma. We in the disability community face a big stigma. And if we could get rid of that stigma, boy, that's my prayer, that's my dream, that's what I'd like to see.
I think you would get a resounding appreciation for that dream across not only this panel, but for everybody that's viewing with us today. and for those who aren't. As each of us rise, then we can all rise. And I think that's something that we are seeing from coast to coast in our nation and around the world right now. It is a good time to be having these conversations. And I would encourage anybody who's watching on the Zoom panel today to reach out to each of us via our various social channels. It's a great way to continue this conversation long beyond this 1 hour. It has been recorded. It will be available on the Achilles webpage and the Achilles Facebook page. Thank you to each and every one of you for taking time out of your Sunday afternoon, early evening, depending on where you're situated, for participating today. It was really great to have all of these minds and experiences come together and talk about the ADA for the future. I'm Kirstin Cole, and on behalf of everybody else on this panel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.